to 360, the experience kids want. Fortunately, I'm just here to sort of get things moving along, and I've got a very esteemed panel with me, which includes Don Anderson, who's the head of kids and learning partnerships at YouTube in Singapore. Bryce Inouye, who's made his way down from Japan via a smoke-filled Shanghai quite late last night. Business head and strategic development, APAC Mattel. Schoff to my, Alice Chu, sorry, I've got it in the wrong order. Head of Asia brand strategy for D-Rights. And Schoff, as he prefers to be known, Chief Creative Officer at MNC Animation out of Indonesia. So today, Lanita, the show organisers, asked for a very robust and controversial discussion. In fact, in an act of terrible racial profiling, she asked how much beer I needed before the session to get it going, but I think we'll be okay without. So where I wanted to start, and I might with you, Bryce, around Mattel, obviously been manipulating kids for decades now. And it does seem to me that 360 kids, it's commercial nirvana. It's something that we all think is a great thing. It's commercially driven. But how does it consider the kids, and how necessary is it to the success of a brand, and how much do kids really want 360?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, and we only have 40 minutes, so I'm not going to get into the whole detail. But I think it's something that we all aspire to, with our franchises. I think Mattel has been really fortunate from the perspective that we have franchise and IP that have been around for generations. So Thomas, for example, is a third generation brand, and we're tapping into grandparents that have handed it down to the parents, to the kids. So our approach to sort of the 360 is more of an evergreen and sustaining that growth versus trying to launch a new IP in the marketplace. And what we really try to do is listen to the recent trends of kids and leverage real hard insights to get some quantitative detail before we actually go to market and make strategic decisions.
I suppose Hot Wheels has come up, and Don and I were talking about it earlier. It's an evergreen. It's been around well before the internet, well before possibly even TV. How are you working with platforms like YouTube, or maybe Don can talk of this as well, now that evergreen brands are living in an environment which is completely foreign to them, and having to try to engage an audience in a completely different way?
Yeah, I think for us, the challenge has always been, as a global company, trying to create content for specific markets and making ourselves relevant and local to those specific markets. And the ability or platforms like YouTube, for example, has allowed us to really tie into that localization and really connect with our consumers versus creating one TV series that's made for the whole world that just gets broadcast on standard TV. So platforms like YouTube have been really, enabled us to do that.
Yeah, they've done a fantastic job, I think. I mean, I'm a parent, and I'm a consumer, and I buy all the toys in the family, and we have a whole closet full of toys that I've stocked up for the last 2 years. My wife's giving me a lot of hard time, and a lot of them are Mattel. If you look at some of the work, it's about authenticity, right? YouTube is an open platform. I think so. There's so many case studies. I have a whole list here. Mattel is a case study, a very successful case study in terms of how to use what you have at your disposal and create new content experiences, demonstrate what you can actually do with the product. Go check out the Hot Wheels lab, which is kind of taking the Hot Wheels toys and producing kind of almost STEM-like experiences, science experiments and such. And that just resonates with with the kind of audience that obviously YouTube has engaged across its platforms. It's just using your creative sort of mindset to go in a different direction. You just don't have to ram a brand down people's throats. And I think kids, just like us as adults, don't want to necessarily be heavily marketed to as well. We want to see what's going on in that space. They want to see what's going on in that space and see a different sort of angle to it too as well, particularly from a creative standpoint. I think not just Hot Wheels, but again, what you've done with Thomas as well in certain markets, that whole localization element and effort, what you've done in Indonesia, what you've done in terms of uniting the community of Thomas fans, right, young and old, and working directly with them to be able to enable them to create and allow them to create and encourage them to create original content too as well. It's a wonderful space to which to play in. So they're one brand that's really lunging in there. And I'm sorry, we were supposed to give you a hard time, but we didn't. Maybe a little later, Bryce.
Appreciate that.
But it is an interesting one, is that just trying to understand, though, from the perspective of YouTube and content and brands, are they trends that you pick up from what the audience is doing, and you see a STEM-like piece and a kid playing with his Hot Wheels, and you as an organisation then tap into that? Or are you driving the creative behind it and actually trying to create these channels of content?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair balance, but the consumer, looking at it from a consumer perspective is critical for us. There's, in full transparency, there was a time when we started to tell the consumers what they wanted versus actually listening to what they wanted. And the platforms these days really lend themselves to listening to those consumers and what they want, and we've responded to that, I think, appropriately.
Yeah, fantastic. So, Alice, just moving over to you. D-Rights, obviously very successful, has had some incredibly successful brands. Beyblade's the one that,
Oops.
there we go.
Some problem.
It's like a Formula One tyre change. That's very good. So Beyblade's incredibly successful. How as an organisation has D-Rights gone about sort of developing their brands and looking at how those brands are going to be exploited over time, and picking up on what ancillary rights might work for the brand?
Yes, actually Beyblade now is getting into third generation. It actually started from 2000 in the 16 years ago. So looking back, we actually we notice now is like turning point for the brand, especially in terms of brand strategy, because the changing environment, especially the OTT, like YouTube platforms, become more and more important for kids. So for us as a content owner, we're always facing the question, are we going to traditional medias, offline media, or should we move to the, OTT channels, new platforms to get more touch point with kids? That's questions we have been asking ourselves all the time, and even during this whole ATF, when we talk about our new strategy to develop the brand in each market. And then I think there are 3 points as a content owner I think we should pay much attention to. The first one, rather than any platforms, I think still the content itself. We do believe that a great content can attract kids is still the fundamental part for any kind of IP businesses targeting kids. If without good content, even with enormous ways to get touch with kids through various platforms, we still think that it won't go far. So the fundamental part for us is still how to create the attractive content for kids, how to make the storyline more attractive to kids, how to keep all the characters charming to kids, and make kids feel that they can find a certain part in the story. They can see themselves in a certain part of the story in terms of animation. And the second point I'd like to point out is the point of view from not only kids. When we talk about how we can get in touch with kids, I think actually it's not about the kids, it's also about their parents. I think kids do have a huge influence on the decision-making process in terms of the choice of content. But don't forget, parents also are the decision-making unit, and they are actually the final decision maker to choose the proper content for kids. So when we do develop any kind of a strategy, we always think about how we can actually communicate with parents, make parents believe that this is good for content for their kids. We all know that nowadays children don't just sitting in front of TV. They use tablets. Obviously, increasing time they have been spending on the mobile, including mobile and the tablets, like YouTube. So children, I think in most of the cases, parents search for the content firstly for them and then give it to kids. So the second point I would emphasize is still, we do believe that how to get the parents believe the content, the quality believe that is good content for kids is very important. And third point, coming back to the various platforms, obviously nowadays incredibly growing of the device platforms for kids, changing the business model for us, changing the way how we approach kids. YouTube and other OTT platforms are very, very important for us today. We have our official YouTube channel. We'll also work with our local partners in each territory to make sure that the local YouTube channel can reach kids as well. But meantime, what I'd like to point out the importance of offline media and offline activities, because in our understanding, with the conversation we have a lot with our target kids, we notice that in most of the cases, yes, kids don't sitting in front of TV watching animation, just waiting there anymore. Most of 70% of the time they spend on the tablet or on the mobile. But the traditional media, like magazines, or depending on the country, depending on the country and territories, we found out that actually the traditional media still have huge influence on the designs and the discovery of a new property for kids. For example, TV commercial or promotional commercial for program or for the products on TV can be the important trigger for kids to come back to YouTube or come back to OTT platforms to search for the content. So I think these 3 points still are, in this changing environment, OTT, YouTube, this kinds of various internet accessibility is more and more important in building our strategy. But the quality of the content, the decision-making unit, how you actually influence them, and the offline media action between offline media and online media are the combination is very, very important for us.
Great. Now, it's an interim because I know obviously Mattel and D-Right have got big global brands. I'm not sure who was in for the presentation or the keynote that Show made, but with MNC, they're very much focused on Southeast Asia and becoming the Disney of Southeast Asia. And when you have a look at the size of the business, they're every chance of getting there. But so how do you, in terms of deciding what brands you are going to go after or that you're going to develop, where do you come from, Show, in terms of your thinking behind the narrative? Is it just about the story? Is it just about creating a great show and hoping that may then extend into other activities? Or are you thinking much more commercially about what all the extensions could be for the property before it even goes into development?
That may depends on the show, I think. So let's say there's a toy-driven show or the story-driven show. Even the comedy show these days, they are like story-driven, character-driven comedies. But in terms of toy-driven shows, like like something like robot animations or Transformers or Ben 10 or something like that kind of shows, that we are also already producing those kind of shows right now, which is Zack Storm, where it's coming out next year, and then we appointed to Bandai as a master toy for that, and then they are keen to distribute for their toys. They're already working on the development for their toys, and then they're keen to distribute from next year. And they think that that's going to be the next Ben 10. That's what we're expecting for. So let's say before, so far, except Zack Storm, Kiko and Titus, that we are in MS Animations producing and developing and producing, which those shows already has been developed before I go. So it's already been developed from the comic, and then they've been already producing in animation. So I didn't have any chance to how should I say? Actually, I changed all the design and the format and everything, but I just help out to improve their quality and their format to fit the show into kind of worldwide standard. That's what I did for Kiko and Titus. In terms of the coming out new shows, of course, we're gonna have to think about the market first. Let's say we take a look at the age profile, we take a look at the R&D from the market, and then we're gonna have to think whether we're gonna develop for a female show or we're gonna develop for preschool show. I've been keep fighting with my top management because of I always keep talking to them that we're gonna have to have one preschool show, but what they are saying that kids preschool show is not working in Indonesia because they tried with so many different preschool shows in like the biggest free-to-air channels for many years, but it's all didn't succeed at all. So they never believe about the preschool show. However, I'm keep insisting to them we're gonna have to have one preschool show at least in our portfolio. It's also because of before or so far, the young generation parents or the preschool shows audience's parents, they are not ready to buy something. It's because of even like 2 years salary and this year's salary range is totally different. Let's say the minimum salary for 2013 is like 30% lower than this year's salary, and next year for 2016 it's gonna go up a little bit more, almost 15% in terms of Jakarta. So basically, let's say we're gonna have to think about the market. How big is their buying power? How wide is their choice can be? And we're gonna have to think about the commercial point of view, and then we're gonna have to pick which type of the show that we have to develop. So of course I prioritize for the in terms of the developing, I prioritize for the story and the character. However, behind of that or ahead of that, we're gonna have to research all the things. Yeah.
And again, I'm not sure who was in here for MNC, but show's in an extraordinary position where I think they've got 42% audience share. He can create an IP and he can put it into his new theme park that's been built. He's able to extend the brand extraordinarily well across Southeast Asia. Don, to you though, for you have a platform, YouTube Kids, and on that you've got new channel owners, creators, who have got incredibly large audiences. They don't come from a traditional toy company background, or they don't come from rights owners. They're just a mum, a dad, a kid sitting in their shed.
Can be, yeah.
How does their audience expect the same ability to, touch them at 360 degrees, and how do they get to market? Because they don't have the traditional distribution and the traditional market relationships that are required to exploit a brand.
There's so many success stories, again, like I said before, in the YouTube space for kids. And we're just on the cusp, actually. It's just really just the beginning. It's astounding. I look at Australia, and you've got Grace Mulgrew, who's 11 years old and working with Mattel. And it's very simple. She plays with Barbies. And she started doing it, 3 years ago, and her father started just shooting video and putting it up on YouTube. And guess how many subscribers she has? 500,000. How many here have 500,000 subscribers on YouTube, aside from those creators, owners, and all that of content? I know Monsters in the room, they definitely are kicking it. But that's unbelievable. I mean, I'm just looking at the numbers here. She's got, started 4.5 years ago. She's got over 500 million video views. In some cases, her videos get upwards of 57 million views. That's insane. And this is kind of like a child doing this, right? We've seen this real revolution occurring where authenticity plays well, particularly to the audience of kids. They like to see their own up there. It's not like the 1970s, my era, where, I just dated myself there, but, you'd have the adult in front of the TV or in front of the cameras, and it's like, hey, bring in the second fiddle child. Let's bring them in. No way. It's the dad behind the camera, or the mom, and the child in front of the camera dictating the creative sort of energy and approach. And she's doing storytelling with Barbie. I think that's a really interesting combination you guys got going in there. And I don't think you're paying for it either, right? Anyway, which is another discussion, right? So things like that. Now, that's Grace. Does she go out and do any kind of 360 sort of, she's doing a tie-up with Toys R Us. She's got exposure externally as well. Balance Patrol Kids, another success story. But they are starting to look at and are doing, events and, outside external exposure. All of that is important, I think, for a lot of these. Now, many of these started just purely in YouTube, right? They were 3-4 years ago. There's a company out of, I'm just name dropping here, USP Studios. They do Bob the Train. Uday and his team, they're 250 people in Mumbai. Again, 3-year-old business, 350 channels, 80 uploads a day. They are unbelievable. And the video, they got 11 billion views. They're YouTube only, right? That's their only platform. They are now looking at the 360 experience, but it's L&M, right? Monster's in the house. Anna Monster from KL, Malaysia. They got Bobo Boy. You want to talk about the next Ben 10, man. They're on it. They got 180, in terms of countries where they reach. I was looking at it as 100, I'm sorry if I'm sharing this, guys, but it's 180 countries or more that they're actually having fans in. Who can say that they have that? That's unbelievable. This is what a free and open platform kind of brings to the market or to this industry, and I think it's very exciting. I'm not seeing anything in the way of a negative news story here. It's a very positive story for a lot of creators. It's creating this whole new system or industry of, I would say, it's creating a flat space really of opportunity for creativity and creating a lot of new jobs, new industries, new opportunities, and 11-year-olds who are getting half a million subscribers. It's awesome, right?
It is certainly a brave new world. And the difficulty is, how does a Mattel or a D-Rights play in this space? So now when an idea is brought to you, what's the process that you go through in determining whether or not that product is going to go to market? Is it now only if it has content which is going to support it? So does the Bug Rider have its own animated series? How is it that you make these decisions now? And how strategic is it in terms of the ability for that product to be more than just a toy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's looking closely at the individual IP, to Seung's point, was some IP can actually support a 360 execution, and some IP does not. So you don't want to go out there and take a startup IP and try to create everything possible just to make sure you hit all the 360 points. I think the beauty of what Don was talking about was that's something that I don't know that Mattel could have created internally. I mean, we can incubate it and start those ideas, but Grace's fans are Grace's fans. And they're her fans, not Mattel fans per se. And she's done that using the Barbie platform as an IP, but really it's something that sits outside of our ecosystem, but still contributes significant value to our 360 for Barbie.
Yeah, okay. What about just looking at it in another way with the way in which obviously content is changing and distribution of content is changing remarkably. From a L&M perspective, so there are so many more brands out there. Sort of the long tail, it's quite fragmented. Kids can go and engage with any number of brands. The traditional place to buy consumer products, licensed product, is in retail. Now, retail is struggling in its own right, bricks and mortar, but and there is less opportunity for product to get to shelf or licensing and merchandise. So how's that going to play out? If kids really, if they see a brand and we genuinely believe it's in their best interest and it's kids that are driving this demand, have any of you got a view on how they're going to be able to access?
But
the
are we
consumer
sure
products
that
and
they're
license?
actually struggling? And that's maybe in the U.S. If you look at some of the larger chains like Toys R Us, their growth is international, right? And the investments they're starting to make are India. You go to the Toys R Us here, they've done a revamp and it's huge. And you go there on the weekend, you can barely move. It's that popular as a spot to go and destination. Same in Hong Kong. So I question whether retail is actually taking the pinch, at least in that space. E-commerce is coming on strong and such too as well. But I think where retail is getting it wrong is they may not necessarily understand what is happening in the space where the audience is, and they're not as well connected perhaps to that, and that you have to have a broadcast deal to get any kind of retail or licensing deal, which is the biggest mistake that any organization today is making. It's wake up, listen to the audience, folks.
Look, look, in Australia, we're possibly about to lose a couple of our biggest retailers. So the retail space is struggling. But you're absolutely right. The first thing that they will ask is, okay, is the show on TV? Now, what's interesting in Australia, you can be on TV and get an audience of a couple of thousand people. It's that small, and yet the show might be on YouTube, and you could be getting hundreds of millions of hits and millions of hits in Australia, and yet retail will ignore that. So how does that model change? And I'm also interested with the way in which kids these days are becoming creators themselves. So the Grace Mail Group, they almost want to be able to create their own product, that on-demand product. Is an Amazon going to step in and sort of assist in this process? How is it that the big toy brands and D-Rights are going to be able to get product into the hands of kids moving forward? Another
Hello?
wheel change.
Okay, now it's working. Yeah, of course, basically, especially for this kind of toys-related IP, the toys itself has to be very, attractive to kids. Like Beyblade, they traditionally have three, unique, we call 3C features, like customized, competing, and collective. Those features have been bared in the Beyblade life in the last 2 generations. But when we started developing the 3rd generation, the new generation, which fit into this digital world, the strategy we have developed so far is to get kids more be involved into the virtual world. So of course we have the Beyblade website. We have a Beyblade website where kids can create their own account with their own choice of the characters they want to be, and with their choice of the different type of toys that they can customize it actually through the website. So that's kind of, I think kids are still, no matter whether it is the virtual world or real world, kids are very keen on this kind of customizing experience. So when it comes to the digital strategy, I think how to create this kind of customizing experience for kids can be the key in not only Beyblade business, but also in other business as well.
And look, that probably, Bryce, I think we talked about, and this is where, and I don't know the complete background, but Thingmaker could come in, because it strikes me that things are moving so quickly, trends are moving so quickly, staying ahead of those trends, and yet the toy industry is notorious for requiring, enormous time, to be able to get product through the funnel, whether it's for safety reasons or development reasons. So how are Mattel dealing with that when, something can be unknown today, going through the roof on Google Trends tomorrow, and by the time you've reacted, gone, by the time it gets to market. So how do you deal with that in terms of exploiting success of brands?
Well, I don't know that it's so much exploiting per se as playing to its strengths.
Yep.
So there's key elements of say, Thomas experience that consumers all want. It's that fantastic CGI animation that we spend a ton of resources to create, and storytelling in the books and the theater, the tent poles and our theme parks and things like that we still need to drive the value and solve for that. But ThinkMaker, the thing that actually creates is a new platform for them to create another dimension of where kids can actually create their own experience through toys that they can create and play with. And what that allows for is more versatility and more immersion into the brand at a much deeper level than you would have, say, for example, with just a standard toy that you could buy at the store. So it's one more element that we try to build on top of the franchise to allow us and allow the kids to create more of what they're looking for instead of just having to buy something straight off the shelf.
So they're in effect customizing Mattel IP?
Yeah, so I mean, there's, I can't speak to the full sort of aspiration of what ThinkMaker could do because it's all about creation. I think on a very basic level, it allows kids to create their own engine, for example, and put, Thomas's face on Percy's engine, for example. Just things that they would see in their own mind and actually create it within a physical product. Yeah. Now, would it ever replace an actual toy that Mattel ourselves create? Probably not. I mean, the standards of quality, the materials that we use, and things like that, there's a lot of resources that go into that, but it also gives them a different type of play pattern, I guess.
That is fascinating, though, that a Mattel, and I might be wrong here, but 5 years ago, 10 years ago, would never have thought about allowing people to put Thomas's face on Percy's engine, and that would have all been against the style guide, and we all would have. How important is it now to allow the kids to be the creators and to drive that narrative and see that they assist in the development of how the brand is extended in the 360?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's by platform.
Agree.
So
yep.
In places like Toys R Us, where Don was talking about, that's controlled by us largely, how it's, what visual material we use, what designs we use, what colors we use, and things like that. But when you speak about kids as creators themselves, like Grace, for example, none of that's scripted. No. We are completely hands-off with that. We want her to take Barbie and sort of create her own world with it and create her own stories, and people love that, and that's where all the engagement comes from. So again, it's really just building on top of sort of the halo pillars that we build for our franchises, that these kids can now take that and create something their own.
Yeah, great. And Sho or Alice, do you have similar experience with YouTubers or other platforms where the kids are creating content around your brands? And I'm wondering if Grace is a positive experience. What happens if, Dark Grace comes along and starts producing content that Mattel or D-Rights or MNC don't see as appropriate? How do you manage that situation to avoid the negative effects on the brand?
We call Dawn.
That it comes up. There's different trends that happen. People are not always necessarily idealistic, or I should say some people are a little bit more focusing only on themselves and taking advantage of trends too as well. It's highlighted. We take note of it, and we are again working with our creators to focus in on producing content that is going to surface, optimizing the channel, so that stuff comes up ahead of everything else. But we are aware of things that happen that may not necessarily be suitable, but that leads into producing a product like YouTube Kids, which we've launched in the region too, and that's not too much of a plug there, but it's based on the fact that I'm a parent and I want a safe haven for my kids to go and get the content that I approve of. I've got a 3- and a 6-year-old. I'm quite guarded about that stuff, so it's providing solutions for a market that is in need of that. So,
yeah. All right, and Alice, have you seen any trends or any changes in the way in which what kids are wanting from a brand? Like, obviously Beyblades, I think you said was 16 years old. I think I lived up in Singapore 16 years ago, and Google certainly wasn't around because there was something called Ask Jeeves or something, and we all thought that was a miracle. So I'm assuming that there are changes. What are the trends that you're seeing coming up, and what are kids going to want from a brand in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think from what we have observed so far by Beyblade case, we noticed that traditional media like TV station, the TV broadcaster still has a certain influence on kids. We cannot deny that. but the portion of kids watching through TV become more and more less. And in our study of the Beyblade case, we have a catch-up service after the broadcast on TV. In a week, we noticed that enormous kids are accessing the site YouTube channel, access the YouTube and watch the programs through YouTube channel. So I think that, as I mentioned in the very beginning, the way that children try to access the brand that they are in favor is changing. They prefer to have more freedom, to have more choices, to watch the program at their favorite time. And meantime, we also notice those user-generated content can be also sometimes have very positive impact on the brand as well. For example, we have a YouTuber who actually we didn't have any business with them, but he actually created a lot of videos that introducing the brand, introducing the way how to play with the Beyblade. And the access to that site is more than the access to the content itself, like 500 million, something like 500,000 views per video he created. So that gives us a way that a view that we do believe that in the next 3 to 5 years, the YouTube or the other OTT platforms, especially in Asian countries, will become more and more powerful, and it will become, personally I believe it will become the primary way for kids to access the content that they like. Still, traditional media, as I mentioned in the very beginning, we still think that it can still keep its position in terms of a trigger, in terms of influence on the TV's, on kids' design to certain content.
And so I suppose in terms of the ability to seed a market then, and Bryce, I was with some of your colleagues down in Melbourne, would it be fair that you're using platforms like YouTube and others where you can actually start to seed the market and get people to provide you with feedback and get a gauge of how things might be trending before you have to fully commit to, or before before the big engine of Mattel gets going?
Yeah, I mean, we pull from any number of countless resources and insights to help guide those strategic choices, but social media is absolutely one of the most responsive. It gives us a quick read and shows us where things are headed. But for Mattel, I think, like I said, we're very fortunate to have very classic brands. I mean, Thomas is a 70-year-old brand, 71 now. So, I mean, things don't swing completely from left to right. Platforms will evolve, opportunities will change, theme parks might grow, and new opportunities will come, and we'll address those, but there's not going to be sort of like an overnight thing where just because we saw it on the web or on YouTube, for example, that we would swing the entire franchise DNA to match that.
Fabulous. All right, we've only got a few more minutes, so I might see whether anyone in the audience has got any particular question, or the hands up of someone.
Hi, from Thailand again. You guys have spoken about the various 360-degree channels to distribute and engage and consume content by kids. Where does it match up with money? Which of those 360-degree channels are you hoping that there would be returns on investment in terms of revenue? What are the differences between 5 years ago and today?
Who wants to have a crack at that one? It's all about the money.
Yeah, good creator content.
I mean, I'll take a first pass at it. I mean, I don't know that it's largely changed. When we talk about franchise, there's all the different pillars that make up the franchise that consist of the 360. So whether it's theme park admissions or content sales acquisitions or consumer products, for example, it's not largely changed, I believe, in the past 5 years. There might be new players and platforms that we do work with and business models. So Mattel, as a very specific example, has partnered much more aggressively and acquired much more aggressively in the last few years than we have in the past. Like with the acquisitions of Sproutling, we're finding new partners for different markets, especially the emerging markets. But I don't know that it's changed largely. I think it comes from the full franchise value, because content on its own, as we all know, it's very costly to produce great content, whether even for short form content, to activate it. So you need all the franchise sort of firing to sustain that entire business model.
Just a follow-up from that, is it fair to say, obviously from a YouTube perspective, Grace Mulgrew and all of the other YouTubers see that as a great way of making money. For them, that's their business, is generating income from YouTube. Is it fair to say that D-Rights and Mattel see YouTube as a platform much more as a marketing vehicle or an influencing vehicle? I know we don't like the marketing word, but is that how so Mattel, you don't seek to necessarily generate huge amounts of money out of your YouTube channels, but you seek to influence behaviour? Would that be fair?
Totally agree. But we don't take YouTube channel or any other OTT platforms as a money generator. We take it as an influence tool, as the touch point with the kids. Still, as Bryce mentioned earlier, we do believe that the business model has not been changed in terms of the revenue generator in that sense. But the way how we actually get touch point with kids, how we actually influence on kids is changing.
Yeah. Okay.
So does it mean that it's still the same old model of making the most from merchandise?
Well, it's interesting. We had a presentation earlier on, and what is interesting where the model seems to have broken down is that so much of, from a content producer's perspective, the budgets have always been predicated on traditional TV, so broadcasters funding content. What's quite clear is that traditional TV audiences are dropping, therefore the money's not there, and it's much more difficult to pull together a production budget. So I think from the research we've done and what we've looked at, there is definitely an imbalance at the moment, and it's going to take a bit of time to address that. The likes of YouTube are now beginning to fund content. Amazon are beginning to fund content. There are other ways in which those budgets have been made up. But it's a very difficult balancing act at the moment, and I suspect that consumer products and other revenue streams are going to be important. But I think we've all got to be fairly frank that very few brands or content series actually generate L&M or consumer product income. I think if your budgets are based around the fact that you've got to make your money out of your consumer products, it's going to be a tough.
I think you have to be careful there. You have to think about whether is it toys for the sake of toys? Is it something that the audience really wants? What are you bringing value to that particular stakeholder?
No, I'm not sure if we've got a couple more questions. Yep, time's up, but we'll take one more.
Sorry, there's one at the back. I missed up a bit the front half of the presentation. This question's for Dawn, though. Hi, Dawn. I see you usually at Asia VR. Mohan here. I'm more curious on what kind of content it's generally targeted to kids based on the stats that YouTube has. Primarily what kind of content is great for YouTube?
So what's working for kids? That's such a huge sprawling answer, because it's really hard to predict. I mean, if I look at the top 10 in Asia, it is so wide and diverse. You have nursery rhymes, you have Grace Mulgrew, who are endemic live creators. I look at the verticals of which our team, in terms of content partners that we work with, whether they're broadcasters, whether they're animation companies, it's just so widespread. There's movements that occur, trends and strange sort of things that come out of nowhere in markets like Thailand. There's a Slimer movement going on there that has been lasting for a while. I don't know if anybody's ever heard about that, but it's basically people taking household products and putting them together and creating very strange things out of them. and then actually creating businesses out of that. And people are watching that stuff en masse, and it's basically people demonstrating that. So, you know, every market has its own sort of what works and what doesn't, or what really takes off. And I think what these platforms provide, and it's not just YouTube itself, it's, as Bryce said, using social media platforms to keep an ear to the ground and watch those trends and stay on top of them. But don't go in and just for the sake of like, I'm going to cash in now. There's a lot of that happens, and that's the content that we don't really necessarily think is the most nourishing. There's a lot of success stories that come in there out of passion, the desire to really create things that have meaning, and those are the ones that are having the most success. Grace did it. It was very innocent. She just wanted to play with her dolls, and her dad videotaped it, and now they've got a business of content creation. Choo Choo TV, it was a business that was built or named after the daughter of the founder. He just put up an animation with a nursery rhyme and wanted to create a little happy, I think it was a birthday greeting for his daughter. He's got a 3-4-year-old business now. These are the success stories, I think, that'll continue to evolve and grow on the platform. Do it for the right reasons.
So, I mean, adding on to that, as a creator's point of view, what kind of contents or what kind of merchandise would work within the contents? That I think it's all about interactive. Let's say if there's a product and if there's some customer, right? Then if this person wants to buy that, then we have to connect the dot between my heart to the product. Let's say in Universal Studio, only in Orlando and in California, only from those two Universal Studios, they sell butter beers. And then I heard that only for the butter beers, they sell like 250 million a year, only from that two theme park. 200 million, only from the butter beer, you know?
Oh, is this for, what's it called?
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Harry Potter.
So let's say if there's a product, but if that product or merchandising doesn't have any like soul inside of the product, then that wouldn't sell at all. But if you have something that if you connect it by the product within your memory or story or character, then you're going to buy that. That's something that you need to think about it.
I think I've been given the jump off. We might have to. Did you need to speak to one of the guys, and can we ask one more? Just one more. He has had his hand up for a bit. Just over here. I think that's just you. Yep.
Hi, Dean Carroll from Umbrella. Just a question for Don and perhaps Bryce as well. You're speaking about an 11-year-old, for example, here who has 500,000 followers on YouTube. Is that really healthy? Should that be something that we're promoting and pushing? You know, we know from the past, child TV stars normally go from down to the road of rack and ruin after that initial success. You know, is it healthy for an 11-year-old girl to grow up with 500,000 people watching her grow up, and what can that do to her personality?
You know, that was a question that was asked this morning by another organization, and I'd have to say there's some really interesting case studies or examples of what this experience brings to a family and to that child's confidence level too as well. I was talking to a colleague who was mentioning this YouTuber in Korea, and they were talking to the father, and the father was saying, boy, this has really changed my son's life. He has opened up, he's become more confident, he's now the cool kid in school, but he just is acting in much more expressive ways, and he's got over 100,000 subscribers, and there's a sense of pride in that. I think I used to teach kids years ago in Hong Kong, and we used to use video as a means of getting them to express themselves and open up, because frankly the ability to communicate is just such an important ingredient in their future and their success too as well, and I think parents recognize that and are investing in that too as well. So I look at all the positives that this can actually provide, not necessarily negatives. I think though that parents also have to be very engaged in that process though, and that is what Grace's father's doing. But if it gives them a creative outlet, and it's a positive creative outlet, why not?
Very good. Well, guys, thank you very much. Hopefully everyone found that instructive. I'm sure the guys will be here that you can inundate them with business cards and everything else as we walk off stage. But thank you, and thanks for putting up with the extra 8 minutes, 43 seconds that we've gone. Very much appreciated.